So today it's day 2 of stats, and if you didn't check out yesterday's video, then go and watch it, where I'll kind of explain a bit more what I'm going to show you today. And also we went through the first 4 maps alphabetically in the map pool, and today we're going to take a look at Lotus, Pearl, and Split, and then the overall data as well at the end. So let's dive straight in to Lotus then. So Lotus, out of 254 team comps overall, this is the most played map. Lotus tends to always be the most played map, if you're wondering, when it's in the pool. But the top comp that we're taking a look at here, the kind of G2 comp, was a very, very successful comp, right? Like 68% non-mirror win rate. At one point, that was actually much, much higher. It was pushing 80% at some point. You know, kind of early on when it was maybe just G2 and a couple other teams playing it, it was really dominating. Then it kind of fell off a bit as it kind of, I think, became a bit more popular and people became, you know, more aware of how to play against it, perhaps. Other comps that we've got here, obviously kind of like an old Fnatic comp here, but with a Vice instead of a Killjoy, was also pretty popular. And then down here at the bottom, you've got kind of the exact same comp, but just with a Neon, which also did okay. In terms of some of the archetypes, it's quite interesting because normally when we take a look at the archetypes on kind of Lotus, what tends to happen is that the old Fnatic meta comps tend to dominate, but not this year, because this year, as we kind of saw on the last slide, these kind of double smoke, double initiators with no sentinel whatsoever have actually kind of, you know, risen to prominence, are the most played sort of archetype, and also are doing very, very well. Double initiator comps where you're playing kind of no Viper and a Sentinel instead, historically have never been very good and continue to not be very good, despite the fact that a lot of people do tend to think that they should be good. Double Sentinel, even though Team Liquid must be a decent portion of this non-mirror win rate, to be honest. I mean, you know, because they did win quite a few games with their double sentinel, but no one else apparently could. And the double duelist, we saw Paper Rex, of course, you know, doing that with their comp more recently and doing pretty well. Of course, we saw T1 kind of back in the past towards Bangkok, you know, also do pretty well with it. So those overall actually did do pretty well. In terms of the agent stuff, there isn't too much to read into here. A lot of agents kind of similar to some of the other maps we saw yesterday, where a lot of them are around 50%, right? No, like, clear winners or losers, maybe, necessarily. The one that I would point out is Yoru, who, you know, did have a 62%, you know, non-mirror win rate, which is pretty good. And his pick rate isn't, you know, enormous. We've seen, you know, much higher pick rates for Yoru on other maps, so that does lead me to believe, like, maybe we will see, you know, more Yoru in the kind of future. Maybe that's a position that people could look into a little bit more, because the win rate is very, very high. Moving on to Pearl, and Pearl is out of 188 comps, so we have a pretty decent sample here as well. And the most popular comp was, again, a comp that you will have seen teams like G2 and Sentinels running in Americas, with a kind of tail fade Yoru, and it did, you know, pretty well. Not dominant like we saw in the Lotus, but, you know, still pretty good overall. Then the second most popular comp actually is the comp that G2 were playing at the start of the year, right? This double sentinel with the Chamber Vice, and some teams kind of stuck with it and, you know, went, okay, yeah, we'll just take this comp and stick with it. And as you see, it still did pretty well overall. And then finally, we've got kind of the T1 double duelist stuff, which again, some teams, you know, decided to kind of stick with after Bangkok, which again did okay. But the archetype stuff on Pearl, I do think, is pretty interesting because, of course, most teams, as you would expect, were playing a double initiator. That was over 50% of the overall picks in terms of archetype for comps, but actually, the win rate wasn't that great. Now, it was better than double duelist, which also did have a pretty significant amount, but really what I want to talk about is double sentinel, because double sentinel, you know, made between a fifth and a quarter of the overall meta here, but did have a very good win rate, right? And against both double initiator and double duelist, the wins were there for double sentinel. And, you know, with the tail nerf, it does make me think, right? Would a team like G2 go back to their comp that they were playing at the start of kickoff? Yeah, maybe, right? Maybe they would go back to a double sentinel. And maybe other teams as well, looking at this, will think, yeah, that's a possible option. Maybe double sentinel is a more viable option than you might think. And we didn't get much double controller, but also maybe people even want to pivot into a kind of double controller, because as you see, the couple times that it was played, it did do pretty well. And when it comes to the agent selections here over on Pearl, again, you've got, you know, Astra was one off being 100%. Only Viper and Iceboxes are only 100%, which is kind of sad. But Astra was very, very close, but not quite there. One came off. You've got Fade and KO kind of struggling a little bit. Chamber did pretty well, right? This was In fact, actually, when we take a look at Chamber's overall win rates, you know, they aren't great. Essentially, Pearl, if you want to play Chamber, play him on Pearl. And when it comes to duelists, again, Jet kind of is the struggler here out of kind of the 3 duelists who do get played. And then finally, we're on to Split, which again is out of 190 comps, not too bad. And the most played comp, again, kind of, you know, fitting into the meta, right? This is very much the meta that we're in, right? Yoru, Breach, Teo, Viper, you know, we've seen a lot of that. Didn't do too well on Split though, right? Like unlike Lotus, where this kind of comp dominated, not so much here on Split. Actually, the most successful comp that was played quite a lot was this one, the kind of Fnatic, you know, Liquid comp. Both those teams, you know, got a lot of wins, you know, with this comp. The double duelist with Astra did pretty well overall. And then other comps, you've got kind of, you know, some other ideas kind of following on with the meta, but, you know, maybe playing an actual Sentinel fully instead of something like a Viper. In terms of the archetypes here, though, again, quite interesting. So here you've got kind of the, what I'll call like the 2024, 2023 meta stuff, right? Like things that Sentinels were playing, you know, back in Madrid. Wasn't making up a ton of the meta, but still did okay overall. Interesting, the most picked archetype was this double initiator with a Viper, no Sentinel. Didn't do as well as some of the other things, like playing it with no Viper and with a Sentinel instead, which you can see did pretty well. The double Senti ideas here on Split also, you know, generally didn't work out too great across the board. But the double duelist ideas, and again, this is where we talk about, you know, where will people go after the Teo nerf? And I do think that, you know, maybe people looking at teams like Liquid and Fnatic will go, yeah, let's just play their, you know, double duelist and let's go for it, because they did do pretty well. In terms of the actual agents themselves, Astra looks like a big winner over Omen, but again, I would say that this pretty much can be explained probably by literally Liquid and Fnatic, right? Both those teams played a lot of Split, and both played Astra against a lot of teams who were playing Omen, and Liquid and Fnatic won a lot of those games. In terms of some other stuff as well, obviously Teo's pick right here, 52%. I mean, that's pretty much going to disappear, which will be interesting to see where it goes, because, you know, we talked about Deadlock in a video, you know, not too long ago. Could this be, you know, a place for Deadlock, who actually did okay? But I wouldn't shock me if numbers like this race and Euro number went up as well, as I said, as we maybe get a bit more double duelist. Okay, and now we're on to the overall data. So we're going to take a look at the overall pick rates first, and then the overall win rates. In terms of the pick rates, this is out of 1,394 team comps that have been played so far this year. And, you know, most of you will be familiar with this data. I do just want to point some things out, of course, that, you know, here at the top, we've got Omen and then Teo. You have to remember, of course, that Teo, towards the start of the year, wasn't being played as much as he was, you know, towards the end of stage 1. Then we had a pretty big gap though, right? Like, this is not normally how this looks. And I think that apart from Omen and Teo, you know, the rest is pretty well balanced, you might say, across the board. Normally there are more agents that are pushing, you know, mid to high 40s here. Normally there's like 4 of them in most metas, so to only have 2 in the above 40% is pretty good. Breach, obviously, there is a kind of a bit of a gap here between Breach and Euro as well. We'll get to Breach in just a second. But then you've got a pretty what I would call a pretty good looking meta, right? Obviously, off the screen here, you've got these 3 who kind of are lower than Clove. And again, with the Teo nerf, it'll be interesting to see, you know, who rises and who falls. I would expect Breach to fall a little bit. I would expect, you know, maybe, as I said, some double duelist ideas to rise up a bit. You know, maybe some KO rising a bit. You know, Gecko might take some of the place some of the time. Deadlock maybe. We'll see. But now let's come to the win rates. And I do just want to point out that when it comes to the win rates, this isn't a case of like, oh, this agent is at the top of the non-mirror win rates, therefore they're the best agent in the game, right? That's not really how it works. More so, this is a case of like, if you're towards the top, that means that you probably should be being picked more on maps where maybe you're like a 40 to 50% pick rate on a map, but really you should be like 80 or 90 because actually you're very good on that map, right? Like we saw with who's going to be top of this list, Neon, right? Neon on Fracture, we saw yesterday, was absolutely dominant, but Neon's pick rate on Fracture was only like, you know, 45%. So really the case is here that Neon should just be a lot higher on Fracture than Neon is, and shouldn't be getting those non-mirror games that Neon is often winning on Fracture, right? Coming up at the top, you've got Neon, Viper, and again, these 2 were the highest agents last year as well. Maybe this tells you that Neon and Viper on certain maps should be being picked more than they are. Then Killjoy, and I think Killjoy, when you take a look, considering that Killjoy's pick rate, you know, is only 18%, what I noticed that across the board on quite a few maps, Killjoy's win rates are pretty good on quite a few maps, right? And so maybe just in general, Killjoy is being kind of underrated. Then you get into, you know, maybe your usual suspects, you know, like Jets over Teo, yeah, they're just pretty good. And then as you start to go down, you know, we get closer to kind of 50%, and there's kind of less to say. But then let's come to the bottom of the list, and let's talk about these bottom three, because I think that these three you can kind of talk about sort of individually, and there's different causes for each of these agents, right? When it comes to Jet and Jet's kind of lower win rate here overall, I think that can partly be explained by the fact that people have now learned how to play Yoru, and Yoru is better than Jet. Legit, because when I was, you know, kind of redoing this for this video, Yoru was actually at the bottom of this after kickoff. People back then, that was maybe their first time of really like playing Yoru, and a lot of people didn't know how to play Yoru. But now Yoru is back to 50% overall, which tells you that people maybe now do know how to play Yoru, and Yoru is just better than Jet. Waylay has an excuse in that Waylay is a new agent, and generally new agents do tend to struggle. Also, Waylay, you know, isn't that great. I think most people have come to realize, so that's also probably part of it. And then Breach. And Breach is a very, very special case, because most agents tend to swap where they are, right? They go from, oh, they were good here, and now they're bad, right? Like, oh, now their win rate isn't as high. That tends to happen. Breach has consistently been at the bottom of these lists. I have 3 years of data now, right? So when partnership started, I've got data for all 3 of those years. Breach is the only agent that for every single year you can literally say with confidence he's going to be at the bottom of the list. And that is even with the fact that this year, one of Breach's historically worst performing maps, where he still gets picked quite a lot in Lotus, he actually did okay on, right? Because of that kind of G2 comp, Breach was winning quite a lot on that map, and so Breach's historical win rate on Lotus is very, very low. But this year it was actually okay, because, you know, the G2 comp, they found a method that kind of worked for him, right? And that's the thing, right? I've got 3 years of data now. We're talking about different metas, right? In 2023, we were in a Sky, you know, double controller meta, and you could understand how that meta might not fit Breach, right? Like, I think that that's completely understandable if that doesn't fit Breach. Well, now Breach is the 3rd most picked agent in the game, and you would call this a tail Breach meta. So, explaining still how Breach is so far down there, it is interesting, to say the least, right? Because, I mean, I literally went back and added up all the games that I've got from the past 3 years, and Breach's overall win rate in the past 3 years is 42.8%. That's out of 548 non-mirror games. That is not a small sample size. 548 non-mirror games, and he wins 42.8%, right? Which is lower than it was actually this year. So, look, you can have your own explanations, but I think at a certain point, I'm going to keep doing this, and I don't know at what cutoff point you want to give it, but maybe just Breach isn't that good.